Hello, the Alabama Legislature is in session right now. Today's the 8th day of March 2016, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about some bills that have been introduced in the legislature this year that may or may not be passed by the end of the legislative session. And the bills I want to talk about deal with family law issues in Alabama. There are about 5 pieces of legislation that have been drafted by the Alabama Law Institute, which is a nonpartisan um, entity that's part of its mission is to help the legislature in drafting legislation. So the Alabama Law Institute is often involved in helping legislators craft pieces of legislation that will pass muster with the courts if challenged. It's there to be a public service. And this year, the Alabama Law Institute has helped draft proposed legislation affecting how retirement is divided in a divorce. It has also created another version, an attempt to pass grandparent visitation, which I mentioned in a previous video, has again been struck down by our Alabama State Supreme Court as unconstitutional. They're going to take another crack at trying to pass something. I don't know what the courts would do with it even if they did pass it, but that's on the list of bills that the Law Institute has drafted for introduction. There's also an attempt to amend Alabama's custody law, specifically what we might refer to as a joint custody statute, that was passed back in the 1990s, that gives a presumption that there should be some type of joint legal custody between the parties. The proposed bill that Law Institute has passed would expand the definitions of different types of custody, codifying into law the idea of joint physical custody, kind of a 50-50 or pretty close arrangement with the child going back and forth. It would also adopt some type of requirements that you see in other states, like Florida, for example, Texas, where the parties have to submit parenting plans to the court rather than just a custody and visitation schedule. The parenting plan would be more flexible and would allow more regular, frequent contact with both parents. Again, it's not very, very detailed about what that means, and I think it would still leave ultimate authority with the trial court if the parties couldn't reach an agreement. But it is another attempt to move Alabama towards a more flexible custody schedule between two parents. There's also an attempt to kind of codify Alabama's common law marriage rules, and really nothing too controversial in there, just to point out that it wouldn't change this, but under Alabama law, there's no time period that parties have to be living together and putting themselves out as married to be considered common law. It could be a matter of weeks or months, so long as the parties are cohabitating and putting themselves out as married. This states some type of actions that would be a presumption that there was a common law marriage, such as filing federal or state income tax together, putting someone on your insurance and listing them as a spouse. Now it's simply filing a declaration that you could file with the probate court saying that you were common law married. There's also a bill aimed at altering the way alimony is awarded in divorce cases. Again, not removing all the discretion from a trial judge if there was not an agreement and the trial court had to make a decision. But this would attempt, I believe, to curtail permanent alimony. That is called permanent periodic or just periodic alimony in Alabama, where it's one spouse pays the former spouse X dollars per month until one of them dies or the spouse receiving it remarries or starts cohabitating with a member of the opposite sex, romantically cohabitating. The bill that the Alabama Law Institute has written would attempt to basically give trial judges more discretion that perhaps you should not be as quick to grant permanent periodic alimony. None of these bills has passed yet. I don't know that any of them will. The legislature, by law, is not supposed to pass any legislation until they pass the budgets. And if they try to take something up before they pass the budgets, you have to have a supermajority to pass what's called a budget isolation resolution, which allows them to take something up. The budget is so dire this year as it was last year, most every year in Alabama for the last few years, that it really squeezes out the opportunity for a lot of legislation to be debated and passed by both houses. That doesn't mean that some or all of these can't still pass, but the legislature can only stay in session so many days during the year, and so basically here in a few weeks the legislative session will end, and absent any other special sessions, they won't come back till next year. So if and when some of this legislation passes, we will give you an update.